All right, I think we can start. Good. Yeah. Cool. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hi. Well, thank you all for being here. There's a bunch of sessions that I really want to go to as well. So it's a bummer that we cannot attend all of them, but thank you for being here. And then, but anytime if you feel this is like too weird, too deep, or too shallow, you can walk out and then find other session that you're interested in. Don't worry about that. I know this classroom is like exit door up front, so it's awkward, but don't worry. Okay, so my name is CL, and then I'm gonna talk about the way that I've been using agents, and particularly working with data. So I think that everyone has been using all those kind of tools, even if it's just chatbot or serious coding agents, but there's a bunch of things that I learned in the past couple of months, and then I think that will be beneficial for sharing and then also learning from you folks. All right, a little bit background of me. I'm a founder of a small startup called Recce. We do data review agents for code changes that impact data. For example, like dbt, if you do a pull request, how do you know the data impacted is correct, right? So we help you with that. But it's not the main topic of the talk. The main topic is really like, my background is more software engineering. I started as a competitive programmer representing Taiwan as a national team. But what I'm seeing in the industry is really like, the way I used to program is almost like using punch card or writing assembly directly now. So this is the scale of the change. And then if you're like data professional, I think the analogy will be like you are using Abacus to actually compute a spreadsheet or doing on paper if you're not using all this tool in a year or so. So really it's something really important we should all learn. So I have a background of working with a lot of open source projects. I built one of the earliest decentralized version control system called SVK. That was before Git even existed. So Apple was using that, Big Game Studio was using that because they needed a better way to collaborate for source code. And then, so that's kind of what inspired me for my career is like, if you change your way, the tool will change the way to work, for people to collaborate, you basically change the whole industry. Look at what GitHub is doing, like creating the concept of pull requests that didn't even exist like 15 years ago. So like, so a couple of years after that, I started a civic tech community back in Taiwan that's basically collecting a lot of open government data. And then so that citizens can make like informed decision and then participate in the, well, like debates or whatever that makes democracy better. So that's the time I started to work on a lot of messy data, like legislation data, budget data, and then all this, like every city has different ways of representing budget. How do you reconcile that? So that's the time I found out like the data developer experience is really like fragile and then it's like really brittle. You have to manually reconcile a lot of things. So I started to think about like, how do we make like data more pleasant developer experience, right? But anyway, I will talk a little bit more. But nowadays, as a software like professional developer, I now let agents write most of my code. And well, sometimes you get it right, but if you apply proper harness or guardrail, actually they're pretty good now. And then, but for data, I think it's still more nascent because software engineering has been practicing this new type of development workflow for slightly longer. Well, long is a relative thing nowadays, but data, I think has a lot of fundamentally differences compared to what software. So this talk is going to talk you through about what I've observed and then some of the solution that I tried and it worked. One of the things I did is actually run a lot of benchmarks to see how the coding agents are more capable working with data if you like apply different skills or different ways of harnessing them and then making that work better. But you have to still measure that to see if it's actually like working, right? So I would also talk about the benchmark in a bit. Okay, so we do have like live demo for the second part of this talk. So if you want to follow along, you can clone this repo and then follow some kind of basic installation that if you want to work with. And then I just wanted to maybe quickly ask like who is like using AI tools daily? Almost everyone. Who is using like coding agents daily? So not just copy pasting, almost everyone. This is awesome. So who is using agent with like YOLO mode, as in dangerously ignored? Okay, I hope you sandbox it right. You probably do. Okay, so that's still like pretty nascent. You see only 2 of like people in the room are doing that. But I can also share a little bit like how we make it safe. And then, so the way I see it is that you kind of have to like incrementally like trust the agent, and then you have to really learn to see what they're capable of, when to trust them, and then gradually like let go. Because otherwise, I feel it's almost like parenting. It's like, You started with like they ask you everything. Can I get at this? Can I edit this file? Right? But gradually you set up some permission and then you trust them to say, hey, as long as the result is this, I don't care how you get there, but show me the proof that is correct. Right? But anyway, so yeah, take a look at this. And then, so the talk title is Building Data Agent. What does it even mean? Right? So like I'm just like setting some basic background. Like, so we're not training a model, we're basically scaffolding around existing model. And then we use a bunch of different things like skills, context management, validation, and then feedback loop, like how you interact with the agent, and then the result feeds into, for example, skills or other way that you manage that feedback loop. So basically like you can see this as a way or a framework that you work with data through agent. And then if you turn that into a more autonomous one, for example, if you use Claude minus P is like non-interactive mode, but you have all that scaffolding there, then you give it an instruction, it will start poking your data, but you have to trust it first. So the talk is really, how do we get there? Okay, so even though everyone is using AI tools, I do want to kind of give you some more background because we need to understand how it works, and then so that we can make the best use of that. So LLM is, everyone's using that. Just in case, that working memory is called context window. So if you exceed that context window, it will, most of the tool nowadays start to compact automatically, which means they summarize the conversation so that you have more room for new information. And then usually that's pretty bad. So I would recommend like if you use Claude to like have some kind of status line thing show you where your contexts are, and then just start a new session when it's almost full. But before that, tell the agent to kind of write down everything they learned into a context file, or update a roadmap file, or a plan doc, whatever way that you preserve like what you think is necessary to be kept. So basically LLM is like next token prediction. So we're modeling like a conversation and then what might happen next. So the machine is like very sophisticated to predict like multiple next token to be effective to you in the conversation form. All right, so what is coding agent? It's wrapping around LLM agent with local tools. So if you're familiar with like cybersecurity, it's almost like a botnet. So you're trusting like a weird black box thing to tell what your machine is to do, like read a file, write a file, or execute some shell script. It sounds really scary, right? But this is basically what the coding agents are doing. But they do have a harness and then like a permission model to at least let you to explicitly agree to do that or ask you for permission every time, right? As long as we trust their logic, right? So, but we don't trust everything, so it's still better to sandbox. Okay, so you can think about this like we have the foundation as in the LLM. It's a very long conversation, and then whenever you add new information to it, the conversation continues. Part of the conversation could be the LLM tells the client side, which is your coding agent on your computer, to read a file, and then send that result back to the LLM as part of the user response, right? This is now called tool use. And then the LLM will make further like investigation and whatever thing decided to write another file, right? So this is like everything that's under the hood, but it sounds very basic, very simple, but this is how it works. Okay, so in the demo, we'll use dbt. Are people who is using dbt mostly? Some, okay. So if you're not familiar with dbt, it's basically a way to organize templated SQL to represent a DAG. DAG is being like basically a data transformation dependencies. So you have source data, it's probably where you ingested something, then you created some staging model, basically do basic renaming and shuffling, normalization, and then you start to like all the modeling work from intermediate layer and marked layer. So basically they are a way that you can manage like even very large complex. We have users with like thousands of dbt models in a more code first way. So I was like just chatting with, well, this gentleman here before starting. It's like, you know, the coding agent is very good at working with text. So if whatever you're doing has a textual representation, the coding agent might be able to work with that. For example, this slide is in Markdown. So I can just tell the agent, well, add this slide 8 and then make it simpler or whatever, right? So this is one of the useful things. Okay, so from today's demo, we'll be building dbt project from scratch with the agent. Okay, so before we dive into that, there's a bunch of like reality and learnings. So we think that AI agent can well, create all this thing and then automate all the things away, right? But create sub agent and do parallel thing and then, but reality is that there was a competition, and then being a competitive programmer before, I was very excited to join part of the competition. It's called America's Next Top Modeler, not model. It's a very well created contest. In a way, it's almost like a programming contest. You submit the answer, and then it has a judge, online judge, to tell you if your answer is correct or not. Right. So the top score of that competition is like a whole day of like a hackathon, and then the best is only 19 out of the 53 questions. Right. So like the agent can write SQL, but if you're asking them to do like proper data analysis, proper data modeling, it is still very hard for them if you don't give them good guidelines, right? So what are kind of the questions in this? So the organizer is Brian Bischoff, and then he basically created a synthetic company that's doing, I think it's retail, and then so it's a lot of like order and then like a vendor, and then it's really messy data. Some of them are even logs from whichever like fake ERP system of theirs, and then basically you have to figure out and answer, okay, which state has like different sales pattern or whatever, right? So it's a bunch of like a very hard question from very messy data. I believe like a lot of you are working in that, right? So this right now, agent cannot like directly solve that, but we can give them some pointers and then make it better. Okay, so I was trying different approaches. Like one of the way that you might have heard of is like letting agent plan first and then execute. Right. So there are various ways to do that. There are frameworks like the particular Claude skill I use is called Superpowers. It has a lot of like built-in workflow for brainstorming, designing things, and then so asking you for a lot of clarification before it actually start working. So this has proven to be doing very well. So here's the basic benchmark I did. So the benchmark is done on a data set called ADE Bench, so Analytics and Data Engineering Benchmark. It's first curated by Ben Stencil. And so the way I run it is, it has like 48 tasks in it. Each task is a half-baked DPT project, and then with a problem to solve, like fix this or add this new column or change this definition to X, right? And then it has a golden like ground truth answer, right? So you can actually evaluate if the agent can autonomously complete that task. Okay, so baseline is basically just present the problem to the agent, and then let the agent just YOLO it. You can see Opus is really good. Without any scaffolding, any like skills, it's get like 70%, right? So there was an interesting concept as well called the latent context engineering, as in not only giving the agent like instructions, but also setting up an emotional support for success, much like in workplace, right? So if you tell the agent like you love them, right? How does it work? Well, actually, it performed better for very smart models. Okay, so it's kind of funny. I had another talk like completely focused on that one, but I won't like dive into too detail in that. But if you have like agent with skills, like superpowers or other skills, with stuff, they actually perform a lot better, especially for like weaker models. But the process itself is already improving the weaker model a lot. And then there's a variant of that called love all, as in we use a lot of sub-agents, right? So you tell the main agents that I love you, but you also tell the sub-agent you love them too. Well, it actually worked very well for the the Haiku, the lowest model. This is the best perform. Yeah. So anyway, so this is like interesting. And then there's a variant of threatening. It's like if you don't do this well, you will get fired, right? And then you can see for weaker model, it's still like improved a little bit, but not so much for like more smarter model. Anyway, so this is so a little bit background of how we test is basically that variance in the prompts that well, you totally got this. Take your time. Love you. Right? Yeah. Totally. And then there was actually proper research on this in like emotional framing for the agent to test how they perform, but it's more limited to like a single turn result. But nowadays the agentic tool are more multi-turn. So I haven't found like a more thorough research on that. So this is like a very like basic benchmark. It's not very solid, but you can see this is like interesting. And then I have a tool that basically collects all the agent conversations so I can browse them. So I sometimes see a lot of like the main agent telling sub agent, CL says he loves you. and then sometimes when they complete the job, they will say, I love you too. I'm so proud of things that we can accomplish together. Anyway, I don't know if it's better, but it's more pleasant to read. Anyway, so these are the variants. So if you're already using that, you can try it. And then if you're like very serious about that, you can benchmark that. Okay, so anyway, this is like not the main topic today, but it's one of the way that I wanted to segue into that you should really benchmark the way you work. At the end, I will show like some script, but you can start thinking about it. Like there are published benchmark like ADE Bench that I was just showing. But what about your organization's specific data? So think about how to curate that as a like basic baseline test to see how the agent are performing. Right, so basically you give the basic data set and then the expected result to see like can they work through that messy middle and get to the result. And so that's kind of close to what we are demoing today, so you can follow through later. Okay, all right, so before diving into that, it's like, okay, all the kind of coding agent is not very prolific, but the problem with then working with data, I think there are three major problems. So I think first is of course context, right? What do you mean by Q3? Is it like a weird physical like cutoff time, or like what do you mean by customer lifetime value? Does it include completely order only, or also the discount or whatever, right? So these are kind of traditional data governance problem. But if you're applying agent to that without that clear glossary or like proper definition, you are gonna just like confuse yourself, right? So no amount of like a skill or whatever will fix that, right? So, but the best part is that you can ask coding agent to clarify with you if they found like weird, like conflicting definition in different part of the system, right? So I think this is the best part, as in you're not just asking the agent to do a thing, but like surface inconsistency, and then you can resolve that. So like try to picture that as a kind of a human in the loop, like let the agent figure out what's wrong, what's confusing before actually start doing things. So these are example, right? So these are all valid SQL. If the agent is only validating SQL, they don't have the semantic, right? So what like if the order is not even completed, maybe return the order. Does it count as customer lifetime value? I don't know. It's well the business decision or however the finance is deciding that, right? So it's not a coding agent's job to figure it out. It can pretend it knows, but it's gonna like cause more problem. Right, so the best solution is really to surface that, right? And then you can use, like I mentioned, Superpower already, and then you can use that kind of skill because it does have a brainstorming and design phase that will try to figure out if things are coherent or not, and then ask you for clarification beforehand. So you don't have to manually do it, but you can try manually do it first, and then see how the existing skills will help you with that, so you don't have to redo everything. But I think it's a good idea to start like poking around and then ask the agent that without any like framework or skill, try to understand how the agent's capability are like surfacing all these uncertainties. Okay, so second problem, like we know context is like treasure asset in the agent world. Data exploration basically is like eating a lot of working memory, right? If the agent has to kind of see what the data looks like and then sift through first 100 lines or first 100 rows, then well, by the time it can start do useful things, it's already like maybe 30% left, right? So you can consider like if you have a full work day and then up till like 4 p.m., you are like figuring out what to do and then realizing what the data looks like, and then you have to complete the work at the last hour of the workday, that it's basically impossible. Okay, so here are kind of like when the agent needs to explore, like what's the kind of modeling like? It's basically consuming that information to form the agent's understanding of the current system, right? So, and then this is like, we talked about compaction earlier. So this is what it will look like. If you have like just a general coding agent session and then tell it to do all the things, and then it's gonna like just compute like all the things and then like occupy all the context. So the problem is generally solved with sub-agents. So you can now dispatch sub-agent and then tell them to report a summary of the information you needed without consuming the main agent's context memory. So this is like now some of the more advanced coding agent has that built in. So if you observe the conversation that it's asking a sub-agent to do something, it's doing the right thing. But sometimes it doesn't do that. So you have to be explicit, say, use sub-agent to figure out how to do this, and then actually do that, right? But I think like this is just important basic understanding, but I think in, I don't know, in a few months, maybe this will be built into everywhere. But it's good that you have that basic understanding to see how the agents are working. Okay, and I don't know like how you feel about like if you're not in YOLO mode, the agent is asking you like, can I do this? Can I do that? Which is generally fine, right? You just have to kind of pay attention to that. But what happens when the agent say, hey, can I run this 100 lines of SQL? Nobody reviews that, right? So that's why it's like, okay, maybe it makes sense in YOLO mode, but but what is the impact of that, right? But so the problem here is that review has no meaning. It's basically, is it safe or like, is it, we can't really determine if it's correct because otherwise we'll spend like human cycle to review this maybe slop the AI generated, right? Which doesn't make sense. So how do we do that? So I think the way that I see this is really the agent has to surface the impact, right? I run this and I will get this result. And then the reason this matters in the data system is that if you're changing your modeling, you have a lot of downstream, right? How are downstream impacted? And then how do you see through that result? Are they intended? Are they unintended? So it's pretty messy, right? So if you, for our example just now, if you change the definition for customer lifetime value, it will drop, but because we correct the definition, right? But is the rate of the drop expected or unexpected, right? So the agent can present you, but likely like this is probably useful, more useful than the 100 lines of SQL. Okay, so putting it together, like the agents that we're like experimenting or building today is like human intention, like what we're trying to do, and with a clear goal. And the agent writes the model, the agent, sub-agent explore everything, and then model the actual data, and then we do some impact analysis, or the agent, another sub-agent does impact analysis, and then human reviews that result. And then we decided we can ship this, right? Okay, so let's do it. I don't know if this will work. I hope so. Okay, so what are we doing? So if you have cloned the repo, there's a setup script inside that will bootstrap the data. The data we're using is the coding agent conversation that you have locally. So if you're already using like Codex, Claude, this will be very interesting because you can observe how you worked. So this is utilizing the tool that created by Wes McKinney, who also created Pandas, to parse like different flavors of coding agents into a structured database. So the tool is called Agents View. You can see in the repo if you want to install that will process all your local logs. And then the exercise we do today is like from that SQLite file, we will do some analytics work with a DocDB attachment to the SQLite. So we're not like overriding the SQLite database, but we're just like doing downstream processing. Okay, so if you don't have that, the setup command also creates a sample database for you. You can use that. That is the conversation I use to create a new project called Agent Lore, which is basically an aggregation for your team members' agent conversation, so we can do analytics. Okay, so this is what it looks like for our team. I obviously use Claude a lot, so I have, can you see that? Yeah. So this is like a cross-team like agent usage comparison, right? And then you can see kind of daily activity, what time people work, what tools are used. So this is like our demo today is just like a streamlined version of like the analytics here. So I'm showing the end goal. Okay, so we start with like just the SQLite database without understanding what it is, what does it look like. We'll let the agent do exploration. And then we will create some like marked models that is kind of per project overview or sub-agent tool distribution. And then I don't think the demo has finished the human intervention pattern. I think this is a very important matrix for like team using AI. Are you just following along? Are you like telling the agent, no, this is not what I mean, and you should also consider this and that, right? So I like from my perspective, I would like my team members to do that more, like not just blindly accept what the agent says. Okay, so now do this. Okay, so if you have this repo, you will see the README that we are check out in the first stage, which is man, and then if you set up properly, you can now do a UV-DBT debug. Okay, I'm not just gonna remove my original one. You should have a sessions DB that comes from the Agents View project. Okay, now I'm just gonna do DBT run again. Okay, so it's got like just the source definition. You can see, okay, we only have source. We don't have any models here. right? So this is fresh. Okay, so the purpose of this stage is to build the staging model. Basically, from SQLite, we don't do a lot of transformation, but some basic normalization, right? So down a bit. Okay, so you can try various things. You can just open it up, and then I will do Claude. All right, I don't use the prompt. I will just say my intention: build staging model, and then clean and scope the raw data for analysis. Right. So this is like basically bare bone, right? And then you can observe what it does. And but you can see that I have Superpower installed. So it's trying to brainstorm what I'm actually meaning when I say build staging model and clean the scope. What is the scope, right? So it's doing a lot of exploration. And all right, so you see it's trying to ask me question. All right, so this is starting to get annoying, and I will show you how to do sandboxing. Okay, the output looks correct. So while it's doing that, I'm gonna create a different work tree, which is a great way to do like isolation. So I will do, for example, work tree stage 1. Okay, I will check out the same stage here. Okay, so you can see it's asking me a lot of questions. Like, can I do this? And then you're not like even running the DuckDB query directly. You're like creating a Python script, blah, blah, blah. So this is starting to get pretty annoying when the SQL is longer, that you don't have really bandwidth to review that unless like you wanted to work it yourself, right? Then why are you using agent in the first place? Okay, so you can see it's trying to figure out what the base model, like the source model are with all this column. What does it mean? And then now it's proposing that I should create 4 staging model. So this is with Superpower, so it's already pretty structured. It's trying to explore first without like just start doing things, right? So if you do it without, maybe I'll try it again, without any tools, I will use something without tool. That should work. Let's see if I have those plugins. Okay, so this one has no plugin because I have a sandbox. Okay, so by the way, this is a very good tool called Pack and Play. It's very lightweight. Basically, it just creates a container and then mounts the current directory. So you can safely do dangerous skip permission if you want to. And then it also allows you to attach like different credential. If you want to do git push within that, you can say like with GitHub credential and something like that. So you have like granular control upfront. Okay, so I'm gonna just do the same thing. Again, build staging model. So now this time without the skills. So it's gonna get more confused, and then like, but it's still trying to understand the project, and then but it won't be proposing that concrete steps next, all right? So I like this better because you can see what it's trying to do. Okay, so it also says, okay, usually we'll do a design doc, but since this is pretty straightforward, can I just go ahead? Okay, sure, go ahead. All right, so this one is again with skill. You can see it's more structure, and then you can have like a proper like human in the loop time when it's done some research and tell you to if you want to continue. All right, and then so for this one is without skill. Let's see how it works later. But this should be really fast. And then one of the things I found like coding agent when working with data or things that need further verification, it doesn't usually do it by itself. It sometimes tells you this is done, now you can test it with this thing. I said, no, I want you to test it, right? So I do have a couple of like thing for the agent to be more proactive testing the results. So I can share it later. But you can see like this one, it's getting more confused. Or maybe it doesn't have the proper session day, sorry. Let me bootstrap that again, all right? Okay, so it's done, right? So it's gonna run dbt and verify everything. And the nice part for Superpower is also it tries to, like for every step, it tries to do a code review before the end. So like in between every step and at the end. So it surfaced a lot of the problem earlier. You can see now it's reporting 4 staging model created. We have all this row. So if this is what we expected, then it's awesome, right? So we now have like proper DBT project that's staged. Okay, so this one, well, I think we'll just ignore that for the sake of time. Okay, so now if you follow here, then we are now at stage 2. We now have like all the staging table ready, but like we're gonna do some analysis. Okay, so I will then, you can check out there's a stage 1 staging. All right, you might just reset everything, it's easier. Okay, now, so we have just completed this, right? And then now for the next step, we want to actually build an analytical model to answer which project uses agents the most and do sub-agent chip exploration out of the main context, and when do human intervene. right? So you can either post this to the agent, or there's already a more detailed prompt. So you can do this upfront, like before you even start a project, then brainstorm with the agent to see like if you can break down this to like more like specific like steps, or what do you mean by tool use? What do you mean by the human intervene? How do you define human intervention? Right, so this is like more detailed one. So if you use this, it's likely it will execute this properly. And then, but I'm just gonna show you like if you give it vague things. Okay, so now I'm gonna do the sandbox as well, because I don't want to answer all this question. So okay, so now you see like the agent without proper planning is getting very confused, right? It's like there's like a Git issue, blah blah blah. So anyway, we'll ignore that. So like try use some skills, like especially Superpower, I think is really good. Okay. So my experience like working heavily with coding agents, that you start like paying very close attention to what it's trying to do, and then sometimes you just found interesting stuff, right? Because it's got this thinking block itself. It was just trying to reason with itself. No, actually, CO meant that, blah, blah, blah. So it's very interesting to watch, but it's also very time consuming. So you almost feel like you got pulled into like just observing it a lot without actually doing work. So, but I think that's a stage you have to go through. It's like understanding what are they actually doing, and then how are they like operating on finishing our specified goals. Okay, so you can see it's trying to still figure out like what the production tables are, and then what models are we adding. And you can see up till now, we're just like working on the production database. So it's doing a lot of poking, and then so you might start to think, okay, can we actually do this for a real database? Can we let the agent just randomly poke stuff? Probably not a good idea. So that's why like sandboxing is not just for coding agent environment, but also it's good that if you have a good practice in your data stack already, like zero copy clones, or like some way that you can have a safe sandbox for the agent to work with. Then, but the problem then emerges like, okay, how do you decide when the agent's changes are done? So that's what we'll see in stage 3, where there's a review step. Okay, so I think it's almost done. Okay, so this stage is gonna create like user interaction, and then sub-agent tool distribution, and all those different tables. And then I'm gonna just spoil it, because then we discover actually sub-agent conversation and data are modeled differently. They are a unique type of session with parent ID, right? So if you didn't explore the data sufficiently enough upfront, you will only realize this later. But this happens all the time, right? Because we never know what things upfront, or maybe the upstream just created different semantics for how things are modeled, right? So phase 3, we're gonna just integrate the sub-agent data. And that we will see meaningful data shift, because the total message or total tool use for each session will be changed because sub-agents are included, right? And then we'll review the data to see if they are correct. Okay, so it's now done the exploration, and then it's gonna create like kind of all the model we just talked about. And again, it's like pretty non-deterministic, so every time might be still slightly different. So the important part is to set expectation at the end and then verify. And then if you use one like all this frontier model, it's very good at correcting itself if it's got like a good expectation, like what does good look like at the end. And then it will compare like the work in progress and then try to correct it when you run into the issues. But again, then, so say we're doing like the third stage, that we are now meaningfully changing how data is represented. How does the agent know it's correct or not? Right? And then do we trust them to do that? So maybe not. So at that point, like how does the agent surface that difference for human review? So we'll get it shortly, so you have time. Cool. All right, any questions so far while we wait for it? Yes? Yeah, okay. How did you ask it to remember that? How did you ask the agent to remember that? Okay, yeah, it's there. Okay, and then when you say they did not, is that a new invocation, like next time? Yeah, yeah. Okay, what model are you using, by the way? Cool. Okay, yeah. So this is like the annoying part, because it's very hard to get deterministic results. So a couple of ways to do it is like if it's a syntax error, you probably don't have good harness that it doesn't even test it itself, right? So if you say here's a thing, I save it to the end, but we can share with you. Okay. So this is kind of my higher order prompting. So most of like 70% of my prompts, like agent interaction, start with exactly the same thing, right? So read the doc below, start implementing this thing with sub-agent driven development. And then make sure it's happening on work tree. And then if I give you feedback, also fix it in work tree. And then when you're done, tell me how to test it. And then when I say done, update progress and final design to the doc. So, and then of course, like, I love you. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. I forgot the exact term, but it's a psychological framing, as in, if you say mistake, they focus on mistake. So, and then in a very long conversation, if you're trying to get it correct itself, it sometimes gets stuck. So it's usually better to start over, because if you keep telling, this is a mistake, it's like a just token. So they're focusing on that mistake. But this is not empirical, just like, yeah, sorry.
So no start over, but
yeah.
But is there something that we can?
So that my experience is that usually if repeated mistake happen, you had maybe like not a very good abstraction underlying. So it gets very confused. Like, what does this even mean? And then every time it's trying to make a new judgment about what this is really mean. So it's almost like the data glossary problem, right? So what does custom lifetime value mean, right? So if you have very complex definition and then everything is conditional, when this is true, this means it gets very confusing, even for humans. So I guess the point is not, there's no one solution, but you have to try it and then benchmark that. And then the best way is really, if this is serious in the workflow or in automated system, create a benchmark set and then try like different combination to see what's more reliable. Yeah, right. That's a good point.
I'll say to it.
Misunderstood. Right.
And I go.
Yeah.
I don't.
Great. Thanks for sharing. You wanted to share something?
Really dumb question. Where can I find the superpower?
It's in the official Entropic repo. So yeah, just like official marketplace, you can /plugin and then you can find superpowers. Yeah.
Is that
Yes. So this is my second favorite thing. So this is a shared context file. I use this for end-to-end tests, but I'm now calling it like user acceptance test because it sometimes confused with like, I should write like a very detailed end-to-end automated test. But I actually wanted to manually test things and then report the result in a context file. And then so it would know that how things are tested. And then the context file should also contain the instruction of how do you do sandbox? How do you create a fresh environment? Like for example, in the DBT land, it will be like a separate schema and something. But you don't need to be like super explicit in the beginning. But if you just say bootstrap this context file, if it doesn't exist, figuring out how to set up isolated test environment, it usually does it.
Can everybody see everybody's files?
No. File, if it's on the file system, yes. But the main agents, like working memory, no. But they will be somewhat like, the main agent will produce a prompt for sub-agent to start with. But they can access the files on the repo, yeah. So that's the magic here. It's like, well, everything is there. If it doesn't exist, make it happen. And then every time just follow the context file and then report new box there. So this is very useful. All right, it should be done already. Okay, so it told me it's all this thing, and then we have like parent and sub-agent tool usage differences and all that. Okay, we are a little bit short on time, so I'm gonna just skip some of the validation. Okay, we can just say, what are the surprising things you found? All right, so in the meantime, I'm gonna just switch to stage 3, which is more interesting because we're changing the semantic for the database. All right, let me just build this real quick. Oh, it doesn't have that. All right, I think this session is busted. Let's keep working here. Okay, so it's trying to do some like creative analysis. And then this is something I wanted to improve in the future. So whenever the agent is coming up with insights, never do complex query, but always query from a semantically like simplified downstream, like almost like a MARC model. So you always like do very simple select so the human can actually review. And then you can hide the messy middle in between as intermediate layer that can be separately verified. So that means that every time they report something, it should be like something materialized already, not just like ad hoc query results. All right, so you can see this is like, oh, sub-agent real worker, heavy session, like there's a lot of human intervention like without preceding tool work. And then sub-agents doing most of the exploration is not doing right, blah, blah, blah. More sub-agent, lower human involvement because sub-agent, you cannot really interact with that. All All right. So this is the most interesting part. There is a fire forget monster. One session run this long from a single user message. So this is actually how I built agent lore. I built first version. It has 5 phases. Halfway through that, I found this is a really bad architecture. So I tell the agent to stop, write down all the learnings, and then ask a new agent to read the doc and then prepare to implement that separately. So it is almost like a 2-hour work. The agent autonomously completed like the current version of agent lore. So this is like, but it's not like a one shot because you actually tried it before. So I have a V0 prototype and have the learning documented, and I had a V1 properly planned based on the mistake made in V0. So this is a lot of time in, I guess, work conversation as well, right? So like, how would you do differently? And then, but sadly, like we don't usually have the luxury to rewind in time and then like do things differently. But agent can do that. What if we start over? Right? How would you act differently? Well, you can actually start over, have a second like project, just implement the whole thing, right? So anyway, so these are like interesting facts here. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly show you. Set to stage 3. Okay, now I'm gonna just build this. Okay, stage 3 is more complex because it's doing some like semantic changes. And then when the agent's done with that, so this is where if you're using dbt, you should be already familiar with like different target, as in you're building production database or development database, right? And then so here we have, this is where like my company does. Recce is, oops, UV install. Yeah. Okay, so this is what it's doing. It's comparing the production and the development environment and try to help you make sense of like what changed. All right, I'm gonna change to light. It's easier to read here. Where's the button? Oh, here. All right, this is what Recce looks like. So you have like a dbt DAG. It shows you like column level lineage. Like you're changing total message. That's the whole thing we're changing. And then we're having some downstream impact here, right? So you can explore like say, so this intermediate session stats. You can do a profile comparison to see like how each columns are now different. We're changing the data type for whatever reason. And then there's like weird, like distinct count differences. So the problem is like making sense of this is hard, right? So this is where the review agent comes in. It will try to see through your intention of the change and the actual result of the data and tell you like there may be a mismatch here and there, right? But that's our product. So if you're interested and you're using dbt already, you can get started with open source, or we have a cloud free tier. Okay, so to wrap up a little bit. So a couple of takeaway. Hopefully that you find this useful. Like benchmark your agent setup. Just don't guess. And then if you hit something repeatedly and then one way seems to work better, try to create like a sandbox environment, work definition, the state of the repo, and then have the agent like repeatedly run it with different ways of working, with skills, with different prompt and all that. So this is like very important. And then I don't think we have time to show you the ADE benchmark setting, but you can check it out. There's a bunch of like benchmark suite that you can model after. Actually, I can quickly show you. This is ADE Bench. All right, so you can do something like that. So this is gonna run the same problem, which is F1006. Like it's like a F1 problem. And then I'm using like a different combination of plugin set to compare. So one is with Recce. So we also have an NCP that the agent can work with to see how the data is different without consuming the context. Another one variation is Superpower Love O, the context I showed you earlier. So these are like a way to run harness, and then you can define the task that is the problem set and then the expected solution. So it is a tedious job to create this, but luckily you can ask agent to do that. So it's really great that you bootstrap something at least, and then you can run that repeatedly, especially when new models are available. Maybe they're more capable. You don't need like weird prompting or anything, but you have to know it works. Okay, so the other thing is build skills. And then skills are basically just markdown files and then describing your workflow and then with some trigger as in when to use the skill, right? And then, well, luckily there's also like skills to create skills. You can tell Claude that create a skill for my workflow. I usually do this way, this way, this way. And then so you can try it. And then for any data work, I think validating data impact is the most important thing, not just the intermediate SQL. You might need to do optimization or whatever for back query, But for correctness, try to think about how to define correctness. How do you make the agent connect the actual data and what does correctness mean? So this is, I think, the hard part for any coding agent working with data, because correctness is kind of ephemeral or subjective, right? Well, just as in like without agents already so. Okay, so and then I show you a little bit of the so-called higher order prompting already. So one of my trick is at the end of the session, I usually ask like, what have you learned from this conversation? How can we improve our skill that's involved? Right? So this is also very useful because within that context, whether it's misunderstanding or mistakes that are being corrected, you want to capture that. But you want to capture it in somewhere that's kind of permanent and then reproducible. And usually skill is the right place for it. But for like the example I show you, end-to-end test, I have like different area of changes. For the one I show you is the team analytics dashboard, right? So I'm telling you to test. The context is like what we're trying to implement. The agent lore's team analytics dashboard should contain all this. And then you bootstrap a context file and then to test all the scenarios, like when the data change, you should reflect it correctly, blah, blah, blah. And then of course, this is great because this file you can actually read and edit. So it's not just like agent doing YOLO, you're having like a very well-defined feedback channel through this context file. Okay. And okay, we're out of time, but just like closing this. So I think the bigger picture is the biggest thing is really the model are only getting better. We're only seeing the worst version right now. Ever, right? So, but you got to like kind of understand how it works under the hood, and then what's the capability, and then it's almost like working with kids, like incremental trust, right? You can let it start like cooking or not, and then sandbox everything is very important so that the agent can experiment safely without like deleting all your data. And then building that feedback loop, either it's a mini one through that context file or permanent one in the scale. These are very important to help your workflow being better. So a lot of things I wanted to do, like enforcing agents to build a semantic layer first, or it goes like in a loop, like how do you actually test the updated skill, right? How do they get CI? How do they get tied into your building or your curated benchmark set? Right? And then there's a lot of like interesting area to work on, and then you're interested, like come talk to me. And then there's a bunch of things I mentioned, like ADE benchmark set, and then Superpowers, and then the agent lore. By the way, agent lore is also open source. You can check it out from my GitHub. It's useful for like sharing experience within the team, because some people are obviously more invested and then already have a lot of best practice. How do you get like the rest of the team to learn from the best performer? So this is like, yeah, I think very useful for in a team setting where everyone is like, we adopt AI and then just learn from the best performer, right? And then finally, Recce is my company. If you want to check it out, it's data impact analysis. Right now for DBT, but I think any data that we wanted to work with, you have a similar problem, like data validation that caused by like code change impacting data. Talk to me. All right, I will also share the slides later, but if you have any questions. Yeah. So when I say start over, it's start over the session, not the whole work. Yeah, so basically, well, unless the work is like totally corrupted or like in a bad shape, you can start over. But if you're like just stuck in a session, just start over. Yeah. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you said you're going to share the slides with us?
Yes.
And I have a question. Since you work with community, do you have any like tutorials, like the ones that we're doing today, but something for beginners? Like if you want to start well, like practice.
Yeah.
Can you recommend anything? Not immediately, even later.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of resources, and then but the problem is not like there's none, but there's too many. Which one do you choose from? Right?
Exactly. Like something that's good documentation.
Yeah.
Has good instructions. And
Yeah.
look at that.
Do you think like kind of like interactive way, like traditional online learning thing, like follow along would be useful, or more like a document tutorial type of thing?
I think more document tutorial.
Okay. Yeah.
You can recommend anything that you think is good.
Yeah.
Even if it's online.
Yeah. Sure. Let's maybe connect and then, yeah.